The night dragged on inside Dubai International. Na-kyung sat quietly in the crowded lounge, her old leather bag resting on her lap, its seams frayed like the years of struggle she carried. Her shoulders curled inward, as if silence could protect her from a world that never seemed to notice her. To most, she was invisible, just another weary traveler, passing through unnoticed. But fate doesn't always stay quiet. Sometimes it interrupts in the most unexpected ways. What would you do if a single flight delay forced you to sit beside a man unlike anyone you had ever known? A man whose wealth and secrets could turn your entire life upside down. Perhaps you have been delayed before, stuck between places, your plans interrupted by something you could not control. Would you curse the wasted hours? Would you feel helpless, or would you see it as fate, quietly nudging you into a story you never expected? If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Which country? Which city? Share it in the comments, because every story feels different depending on where you are in the world. And tonight's story, well, it begins with one woman who thought her life was already written in silence. Na-kyung adjusted the thin cardigan draped over her shoulders. It wasn't the elegant kind you saw on the wealthy passengers around her. It was practical, modest, just enough to keep her warm under the airport's cool air conditioning. She was used to blending in, the kind of woman people's eyes slid past without pause. And honestly, she preferred it that way. Around her, the lounge was a picture of contrasts. A group of businessmen argued loudly in English over contracts, their expensive watches glinting under the fluorescent lights. Nearby, a young backpacker stretched out on the floor, using her worn-out jacket as a pillow. Families chased after restless children, and announcements boomed every few minutes in multiple languages. Everyone seemed to have a story, a destination, a purpose. Na-kyung reminded herself she was just one of many faces, here for no one to notice. The announcement came over the speakers. Flight KE962 to Seoul, delayed for 1 hour due to technical checks. A collective groan rippled across the lounge. Some travelers called assistance, others complained loudly into their phones. Na-kyung just sighed softly. She could wait. She always waited. Nearby, an elderly couple struggled with their boarding passes, frowning over the seat numbers. The woman tugged at her husband's sleeve, whispering urgently. Na-kyung's ears picked up enough to understand. They had been assigned seats far apart from each other. The old woman looked distressed. Without a thought, Na-kyung rose from her chair and approached them. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Would you like me to trade seats with one of you, so you can sit together?" The couple's faces brightened in relief. The husband clasped her hand briefly, his eyes moist with gratitude. "Thank you, dear. That is very kind. It was nothing, really. Just a seat. Just a few hours." She didn't think twice. When boarding was finally announced, Na-kyung followed the stream of passengers down the jet bridge. She clutched her boarding pass, now with a new seat number scribbled across it. She didn't care where it placed her. She only hoped the old couple would feel more comfortable. The airplane smelled faintly of recycled air and coffee. She stepped inside, offered a polite nod to the flight attendants, and found her seat. Sliding into the row, she noticed immediately the man already seated by the window. He wasn't dressed like most of the business travelers. His suit was tailored, yes, but the tie was missing, and the top button of his shirt was undone. His posture was relaxed, but there was an energy about him, a presence that filled the small space before he even turned his head. When he did, Na-kyung's breath caught for a moment. His features were sharp but softened by a kind of tiredness, as if he had seen too much too soon. Dark hair framed a face that women might call handsome, though his eyes held something distant, almost unreadable. "Looks like you're my seatmate," he said, his voice low with a hint of amusement. Na-kyung gave a small bow of her head. "Yes. Sorry if I'm intruding." He chuckled. "On an airplane, everyone intrudes. No escape, right?" She blinked at him, unsure how to reply. She wasn't used to small talk with strangers. especially not strangers who radiated the kind of wealth and confidence she could never imagine for herself. She settled her bag carefully under the seat and fastened her belt. The plane filled with noise, children crying, overhead bins slamming shut, flight attendants giving safety instructions. Na-kyung tried to focus on the booklet in front of her, but she could feel his gaze shift toward her every now and then. It made her skin prickle with unease. Finally, he spoke again. "You're very generous. Most people don't give up their seat. I saw what you did back at the gate." Her eyes darted to him, surprised. "Oh, it was nothing. Just an old couple who wanted to sit together." He leaned back, studying her. "Not nothing. People are selfish when traveling. You must know that. But you didn't hesitate." She flushed, uncomfortable with the attention. "It was just the right thing to do." He tilted his head slightly, as though he wanted to push further, but instead, he smiled faintly and turned back to the window. The plane taxied to the runway, engines roaring, the cabin vibrating. Na-kyung gripped the armrest unconsciously. Takeoff always made her nervous. She hated the rush of speed, the sudden lift, the moment when the ground fell away. Beside her, he noticed. Without saying anything, he shifted slightly, steadying his arm along the shared rest as if offering silent reassurance. She didn't accept, not outwardly, but some part of her registered the gesture. When the plane finally leveled off, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He glanced sideways. "First time flying?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I've flown before. I just don't like the takeoff." His lips curved. "Funny. I don't like the landing. Guess that makes us opposites." The unexpected humor pulled a tiny laugh from her lips before she could stop it. She pressed a hand to her mouth, startled by the sound. It had been so long since she'd laughed with a stranger. And he noticed. "See? You do laugh. I was starting to think you were one of those mysterious passengers who sit stone-faced the entire flight." Her cheeks warmed. "I don't usually talk much to strangers." "Then I should feel honored," he said lightly. "Or maybe a little nervous. I never know what quiet people are really thinking." The words hung between them, half joking, half serious. Na-kyung didn't answer. How could she? If he knew the truth, the thing she kept buried, he wouldn't be smiling so easily. For a while, silence stretched between them. But it wasn't heavy. It was strange, comfortable almost. Na-kyung leaned her head back, closing her eyes. She told herself she wouldn't speak more. She had always lived quietly, never giving pieces of herself away to those who might not understand. But somehow, sitting here beside him, the silence felt different, as if it wasn't hers to control anymore. She opened her eyes and found him still watching the night sky through the oval window, lost in thought. There was something unusual about him. He didn't act like the loud businessmen or arrogant executives she had encountered before. His quiet was different. It carried weight, but also vulnerability. Who was he really? The engines hummed steadily, the lights dimmed for the night flight, and passengers around them began to doze off. Na-kyung stayed awake, stealing occasional glances at the man beside her. She wondered if fate had played a small trick on her tonight, placing her here, next to him. She didn't yet realize that this flight would not only take her across the skies, but into the most unexpected chapter of her life. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight settled into the long journey towards Seoul. Outside the window, the sky stretched endless and dark, punctuated only by the faint glow of stars and the curve of the moon. The hum of the engines was steady, but every now and then the plane shuddered with a pocket of air. Passengers murmured, shifting in their seats. Some wrapped themselves in blankets, others tugged at eye masks, determined to sleep through the night. Na-kyung tried to focus on the book she had pulled from her bag. The pages were worn, the cover bent, a novel she had read many times before. But the words refused to stay still. She was aware, too aware, of the man sitting next to her. Han Ji-hoon. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew he wasn't ordinary. The turbulence came without warning. A sudden drop, a violent shake. Gasps filled the cabin as the plane jolted hard to one side. Drinks spilled, overhead bins rattled. Na-kyung's heart slammed against her chest. Instinctively, her hand shot out, gripping the armrest with white knuckles. Her book slid from her lap to the floor. Beside her, Ji-hoon steadied his glass of water and then glanced at her pale face. Without hesitation, his hand moved closer, gently covering hers on the armrest. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just air currents. Nothing dangerous." She froze, her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected the touch. His hand was warm, grounding. For a moment, the panic receded, not because the turbulence stopped, but because she wasn't alone in facing it. She nodded stiffly, not trusting her voice. The plane rocked again, softer this time, then leveled. Passengers laughed nervously, brushing it off. A flight attendant moved quickly down the aisle, checking on everyone. Na-kyung unclenched her hand slowly, realizing her palm had pressed so tightly against his that her skin tingled when she pulled away. "Better?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She swallowed, forcing words past her lips. Yes. Thank you." He leaned back, studying her for a moment. "You looked like you were about to leap out of your seat. Not much of a flyer, are you?" Her cheeks warmed. "I don't like turbulence." "Few people do." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "But you don't strike me as the type to show fear easily." "Interesting." Na-kyung turned her face toward the seat in front of her, pretending to focus on the safety card tucked into the pocket. She hated attention. She hated being read so easily by someone she had just met. But something about his tone, it wasn't mocking. It was observant, almost gentle. Minutes passed. She picked up her fallen book, brushing the cover as though it mattered. He noticed. "What are you reading?" he asked. She hesitated, then held up the worn copy. "A novel." He chuckled softly. "I could have guessed that. But which one?" Her lips twitched. "It's Korean. You probably wouldn't know it. Try me." She almost smiled at his persistence. "It's called The Sound of Rain at Dawn. Old, not very famous. I've read it too many times." He tilted his head. "Comfort reading, then? Something safe, familiar." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You analyze strangers often?" "Only when I'm curious," he said easily. "And right now, I am." The words should have unsettled her, but strangely, they didn't. There was no arrogance in the way he said it, just honesty. Silence stretched, but it was no longer uncomfortable. The plane had steadied, and most passengers were settling into sleep. But for Na-kyung, the quiet pressed on her, urging her to fill it. She surprised herself when she spoke again. "I don't usually talk much to people on flights," she admitted. "Or anywhere, really." "Why not?" he asked simply, as though it was the most natural question. Her mouth opened, then closed. Why not? Because silence had been safer. Because words had once betrayed her. Because when she was younger she had spoken too freely and paid for it with scars that didn't show on skin. But she couldn't say that. Not yet. Instead, she said softly, "I just prefer quiet." He studied her profile, as if sensing there was more. But instead of pressing, he leaned back, respecting the boundary, he said after a pause. "People forget how loud the world is. Sometimes silence says more than words." Something in his tone made her glance at him. For a man who looked like he belonged in glossy magazines or on business covers, he didn't speak like them. His voice carried weariness, yes, but also sincerity. "Most people don't think that way," she murmured. "Most people aren't worth thinking about." He replied lightly, earning a startled laugh from her. She covered her mouth again, but it was too late. The laugh slipped free, soft but real. He looked at her with a small smile of victory. "There it is again. You laugh more than you claim." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had noticed her laughter? When was the last time she had even allowed it? The memory tugged at her suddenly, uninvited. She was a little girl again, sitting on the floor of her family's apartment, crayons scattered around her. She had been coloring a picture of the ocean, laughing with her younger brother. Her mother's soft voice had floated from the kitchen, singing along with the radio. The warmth of that moment had felt safe. But then, the door had slammed open. Her father's voice had cut through the joy like a blade, shouting about bills, about failures. The crayons snapped in her hands as she learned how quickly laughter could vanish. Another memory layered on top. Being a teenager, sitting with friends after school. She had spoken too honestly, revealing dreams that didn't match her father's strict rules. The punishment had been swift, her voice silenced for weeks. That was when she learned that words carried danger, that silence could be armor. Na-kyung blinked hard, pulling herself back to the present. She forced the memory down, burying it where it belonged. But Ji-hoon was still watching her closely, his gaze too perceptive. Lost in thought? He asked quietly. She nodded, keeping her voice neutral. Yes, just memories. Good ones, I hope. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. He didn't push further. Instead, he reached for his water and took a sip, letting the conversation fade into the background hum of the engines. But the connection had been made. A thread, invisible but strong, now tied them together in the dark cabin of the plane. Na-kyung turned slightly, studying him in return. His watch was expensive but not flashy. His shirt was crisp, but his tie was missing. His shoes were polished, but there was a scuff on one side, as though he'd walked more than most men like him would. Something about him didn't fit the mold of the powerful businessmen she had once served coffee to in airport lounges. He didn't act entitled. He acted tired, and that tiredness intrigued her. Her fingers traced the edge of her book absent-mindedly. She wanted to ask him something, anything, to keep this strange connection alive. But her courage failed her, as it always did. Words caught in her throat, retreating into silence. Ji-hoon, however, seemed to sense it. He glanced at her again, eyes glinting with quiet amusement. You're trying very hard not to ask me something. She stiffened. I'm not. He leaned back, smirking faintly. You're even worse at lying than you are at hiding your fear of turbulence. Her lips parted, indignant. I wasn't. He raised a brow. You were. Against her will, a small laugh escaped her again, this one more genuine. She shook her head, looking away. You're insufferable. I've been called worse. And there it was again, that mix of humor and gravity that made him unlike anyone she had met before. As the engines droned on, the invisible thread between them pulled tighter. Neither of them knew it yet, but the night would unravel secrets neither planned to share. The night flight stretched on, steady and unbroken, a long silver bird carving its path across the darkness. Most passengers had surrendered to sleep, a quiet blanket of snores, shifting bodies, and the occasional chime of the call button filled the cabin. Only the glow of the seatbelt signs and the muted lights above each row kept the space from falling into complete shadow. Na-kyung sat upright, eyes fixed on the page of her book, though she had not turned it in 20 minutes. Her mind was restless, replaying the strange ease of conversation with the man beside her. It was unsettling. For years she had practiced invisibility, yet here she was, being noticed, and worse, responding. Han Ji-hoon shifted in his seat, stretching slightly, the fabric of his shirt pulling across his shoulders. He glanced at her book, then at her face. You're not reading, he said matter-of-factly. Her head turned, startled. I am. No, you're not. You've been on the same page since the turbulence ended. She shut the book a little too quickly, cheeks warming. Maybe I like this page. His laugh was soft, genuine, cutting through the hum of the engines. You're a terrible liar. She pressed her lips together, but a smile threatened at the corners. You shouldn't pay so much attention to strangers. Maybe I don't see you as a stranger anymore, he replied lightly. The words lingered between them, heavier than he intended. Na-kyung shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. To cover it, she leaned forward to tuck the book back into her bag. When she sat back again, he was still watching her, his expression thoughtful. You know, he said, most people are desperate to talk about themselves. It's strange to meet someone who tries so hard not to. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Not everyone's story is worth telling. Or maybe, he countered. Some stories are too important to tell lightly. Her chest tightened at that. He couldn't know, of course. But his words struck too close to truths she had buried. To her relief, he didn't push further. Instead, he leaned back, resting his head against the seat. Want to know a secret? He asked suddenly. Her brow furrowed. Why would you tell me a secret? Because you're quiet, he said simply. Quiet people keep secrets. It feels safer. Despite herself, she tilted her head. And what secret would a man like you possibly have? He chuckled at the phrasing. A man like me? You're clearly someone, she said, gesturing vaguely at his tailored clothes, his watch, his effortless posture. Not just an ordinary traveler. For the first time, his smile faltered slightly. He stared at the seat in front of him, as if debating something. Then he exhaled slowly. You're right, I'm not ordinary. But that doesn't mean I'm free. Her eyes narrowed. Free? I'm on my way home, he said quietly. Not because I want to be, but because it's expected of me. There's a difference. The heaviness in his tone caught her off guard. She had assumed wealth meant choice, but here was a man suggesting the opposite. She studied him carefully, searching for more. But he turned back to the window, eyes reflecting the faint starlight. His profile looked carved in sadness. Is it family? She asked before she could stop herself. His lips curved slightly, but it wasn't quite a smile. Family, business, duty, take your pick. There was bitterness there, but also resignation. She recognized it instantly. She had lived that same flavor of restraint in her own way. To ease the weight of the moment, she said softly, You sound dramatic, like one of those tragic heroes in the books I read. His head snapped toward her, startled. Then he laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and disarming. Tragic hero, that's new. Usually I get called arrogant, spoiled, or insufferable. She raised a brow. Maybe you are. I've only known you for a few hours. Then you're being generous with your judgment, he teased. Her lips pressed together, but she couldn't hide the spark of amusement in her eyes. They fell into a rhythm after that. Small remarks, dry humor, quiet laughter muffled so as not to disturb the sleeping passengers. It was strange, how easy it became. Na-kyung found herself speaking more than she had with anyone in months, maybe years. He asked about her travels, and she answered in vague terms. She asked about his, and he gave careful half-truths, avoiding specifics. Yet in those fragments they wove a fragile trust. At one point, he leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. Do you believe in fate? She froze, surprised. Why would you ask that? He shrugged. Because this feels like it. You giving up your seat, me ending up here. We could have been rows apart. We could have been complete strangers still. But instead, they were here. Her pulse quickened, though she masked it with a quiet sigh. Fate is just what people say when they don't want to admit life is random. Maybe, he agreed softly. But maybe it's also life's way of giving us choices we wouldn't have otherwise. She turned away, staring at the dark window. His reflection lingered there, faint but clear. The thought unsettled her. Not just the idea of fate, but the way his words slipped past her defenses. Would you agree with him? Do you believe in fate? Or do you think everything is just coincidence? Tell me, because I wonder how many of you watching right now would see this moment as destiny. Na-kyung shifted in her seat. uncomfortable with how deeply the question stirred her. She had always believed her life was a series of accidents and mistakes. Fate had never been kind to her. Yet sitting here, listening to his voice, she felt something she hadn't in years. Possibility. Her hands tightened in her lap. She told herself it was just the altitude, just the strange intimacy of sharing a row in the quiet dark of the cabin. But when his gaze lingered on her, when his shoulder brushed hers as he shifted, the truth pressed closer. This was dangerous. This was not the kind of night she was supposed to have. And yet, she couldn't look away. The plane carried them steadily onward. But for Na-kyung and Ji-hoon, time itself seemed suspended. Two lives, colliding by chance, or perhaps by fate, held in fragile balance at 30,000 feet. And though neither would admit it aloud, both knew. Something had begun. The cabin had grown quieter, the kind of quiet that only comes in the middle of a night flight. The hum of the engines was constant, steady, almost like a lullaby. Around them, passengers slept in uneasy positions, heads leaning on shoulders, mouths open, blankets tangled. A child whimpered in his dreams a few rows back, and a flight attendant padded softly down the aisle, her steps nearly soundless. Na-kyung couldn't sleep. She never slept well on planes, and tonight her thoughts were far too restless. She glanced at the man beside her. Han Ji-hoon sat with his seat reclined slightly, his eyes open, staring at the ceiling panel as though it held answers. "You're awake too," she whispered. His head tilted toward her, a faint smile curving his lips. "And here I thought I was the only insomniac on this flight." She hesitated, then leaned slightly closer so her voice wouldn't carry. "Why can't you sleep?" He exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Too many thoughts. Too many things waiting for me when we land." There was something in his voice, resignation maybe, or exhaustion, that stirred her curiosity. "Like what?" For a moment he didn't answer. Then, quietly, "An engagement I don't want." Her eyes widened before she could mask her reaction. "Engagement?" He gave a short laugh, but it was hollow. "Arranged. Old-fashioned, isn't it? But in my family, duty matters more than desire." Na-kyung shifted uncomfortably. She had suspected he carried weight, but she hadn't expected this. "And you? Can't say no? Not if I want to keep the company intact. Not if I want to keep peace with my family." He rubbed a hand over his face as though the confession had drained him. "I don't expect you to understand. It sounds ridiculous, I know. A man with everything, complaining about not having a choice." She studied him, her voice softer now. "Having everything doesn't mean much if you don't have freedom." His gaze snapped to hers, surprised by the insight. For a moment, silence thickened between them. Then he said quietly, "You understand more than you admit." She turned her face away, but his words dug deep. He didn't know how true they were. The hum of the plane filled the gap. Na-kyung's fingers traced invisible patterns on her armrest, her thoughts drifting where she didn't want them to go. She thought of her younger brother, left behind in Seoul, struggling with bills and responsibilities. She thought of her father, whose voice had carved silence into her bones. She thought of all the dreams she had buried because speaking them aloud had only ever led to pain. "Can I tell you something?" she asked suddenly, her voice so low it was almost a breath. "Of course." She hesitated, words trembling at the edge of her lips. She never shared pieces of herself. Yet here, in the strange intimacy of a dark cabin thousands of feet above the earth, she felt safer than she ever had. "When I was younger, I used to talk too much. I wanted to share everything I thought, everything I felt. But then I learned that words can be dangerous. They can be used against you. So I stopped." She swallowed hard. Silence became easier. Ji-hoon's expression softened. He didn't speak right away, as though afraid a careless word might break the fragile truth she had laid between them. Finally he said, "That's not nothing, Na-kyung. That's survival." The way he said her name made her heart stutter. She hadn't realized how much weight it carried until someone spoke it with care. Before she could reply, the plane lurched again, a sudden dip that rattled trays and sent a gasp through the cabin. A woman across the aisle clutched her husband's arm. Na-kyung stiffened, her pulse racing. Without hesitation, Ji-hoon reached for her hand again, this time firmly, deliberately. His fingers threaded through hers, anchoring her as the turbulence shook the cabin. She should have pulled away. She should have kept her distance. But instead, she held on. The shaking subsided, leaving only the quiet thrum of the engines. Still, neither of them let go. She turned her face toward him, startled by how calm he looked. "You don't seem afraid at all. I've been through worse storms," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "But I'm glad you're here." Her breath caught. She told herself it was the altitude, the exhaustion, the long hours without sleep. But the warmth of his hand, the sincerity in his eyes, none of that could be explained away so easily. They sat like that for what felt like forever, neither speaking, their hands still entwined. Words seemed unnecessary, as though the silence between them had transformed from a shield into a bridge. Finally, he broke it. "It's strange, isn't it? How you can sit beside someone for a few hours and feel like you've known them much longer." She nodded faintly. "Strange. And dangerous." His smile returned, faint but real. "Maybe. But sometimes danger is the only way to feel alive." Her chest tightened at the honesty in his tone. For the first time in years, she wondered if she, too, wanted to feel alive again. They kept talking in whispers, as though the darkness demanded honesty. He asked her about her favorite places, and she admitted she loved the sea, though she hadn't been in years. He confessed he preferred the mountains, because they made him feel small in a way money never could. She told him she used to dream of studying abroad, but life had other plans. He revealed he once wanted to be a musician, before his family told him business was his only future. With each confession, their hands remained joined, and the distance between them seemed to shrink. At one point, Na-kyung leaned her head back, staring at the ceiling. "Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you had chosen differently?" "All the time?" he admitted. "But then I remember, I never really had a choice." She turned her face toward him, her voice soft but firm. "Everyone has a choice. Some are just harder than others." The way she said it left him silent, thoughtful. For the first time, perhaps, he wondered if that was true. And for Na-kyung, the night carried a revelation of her own. Silence had always been her armor, but maybe tonight, with him, words could be something else. Something healing. As exhaustion finally pressed at their eyelids, they drifted toward half-sleep. But still, their hands remained clasped, neither willing to let go. It was only a few hours in the sky, but for both of them, it already felt like a lifetime. The cabin lights brightened slowly, announcing the end of the long night. Curtains pulled open, revealing a pale gray dawn above the clouds. Flight attendants moved quietly between the rows, reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts and prepare for landing. Lee Na-kyung stirred, blinking against the sudden light. Her hand was still loosely held in his. The realization jolted her awake, and she slipped her fingers free quickly, pretending to stretch. But the warmth lingered on her skin, a reminder of the night that had felt unlike anything else in her life. Han Ji-hoon didn't say anything at first. He only looked at her, his gaze unreadable, as if memorizing her face. Then he smiled faintly, as though nothing needed to be said. The captain's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing in Seoul shortly. Please return your seats to the upright position and ensure all belongings are secure." Reality was arriving, fast and unrelenting. The plane descended, shuddering as it cut through layers of thick morning clouds. Na-kyung's stomach tightened, though not from fear this time. The ground was rising to meet them, and with it came a truth she couldn't avoid. The night was ending. Beside her, Ji-hoon seemed calm, though his jaw was tight. She wondered what awaited him beyond the gates. He had spoken of duty, of an engagement he didn't want. Whatever it was, it felt far from her world. The wheels touched down with a jolt, the cabin filling with a rush of engines braking hard. Passengers clapped weakly, relieved to be home. But Na-kyung's chest ached with something else entirely. They filed out with the others, moving through the long, sterile corridors of Incheon International. Na-kyung walked beside him, neither speaking, each lost in thought. She wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge what had happened between them. But the words refused to come. At the arrival hall, everything fractured. A crowd surged forward. Journalists with flashing cameras, family members in expensive coats, assistants holding signs. The air was filled with shouts. "Han Ji-hoon! Over here!" Na-kyung stopped in her tracks, startled. She had suspected he wasn't ordinary, but this was something else. Security guards moved quickly, creating a barrier around him. He glanced back at her once, his eyes searching hers. For a heartbeat, the chaos blurred, and it was just the two of them again. Then he was swept away. She stood frozen, clutching her bag to her chest as people rushed past. Reporters fired questions, cameras clicked endlessly, and Ji-hoon disappeared into the storm of his world. For Na-kyung, there was no one waiting, no cameras, no family, no noise. She walked alone to the exit, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Outside, the cold air of Seoul stung her cheeks. Buses lined the curb, taxis honked impatiently. She chose the anonymity of the bus, sliding into a seat by the window. The city passed by in streaks of gray and neon, familiar and unremarkable. Her phone buzzed once, a reminder of bills due. She sighed, tucking it back into her bag. Whatever had happened on the plane, it belonged to the sky. Down here, she was just Lee Na-kyung again, the quiet woman who blended into the crowd. The bus wound through the morning streets. She passed neighborhoods where laundry hung from balconies, markets opening with clattering shutters, children in uniforms rushing to school. It was the Seoul she knew, ordinary, relentless, demanding. Meanwhile, across the city, Ji-hoon's car glided past the same streets but saw none of it. The windows were tinted, muting the world outside. His family spoke around him, his mother reminding him of the engagement dinner, his father discussing the upcoming merger, his assistant listing appointments he could not miss. Their words pressed against him like heavy chains. Through it all, he stared out the glass, eyes fixed on the same dawn that had touched Na-kyung's face. He thought of her silence, her laughter, her honesty. He thought of her hand in his, steadying him more than he had expected. Two lives, traveling parallel, divided by status and expectation. Yet both carried the memory of that night in the sky. Na-kyung pressed her forehead against the bus window, closing her eyes. For a fleeting second, she imagined standing up, finding her way back to the private exit where he had vanished. She imagined calling his name, breaking the invisible line between their worlds. But she didn't, because people like her didn't belong in the lives of people like him. And yet, her hand tingled where his had held it, as if reminding her that belonging wasn't always decided by wealth or status. Sometimes, belonging was decided by a single night, by a single choice. What would you do in her place? Would you walk away quietly, letting the memory fade like a dream? Or would you fight to find him again, even if the world told you not to? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me in the comments because your perspective adds to this story. And if you enjoy being part of these what-if journeys, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscription helps this channel bring more stories like this one. Stories of love, of choices, of moments that remind us how fragile and beautiful life can be. And by subscribing, you won't miss the next story, waiting just around the corner. Na-kyung's bus rattled over a bridge, the Han River gleaming faintly beneath the pale morning light. She told herself it was over. She told herself she would forget. But deep down, she knew, forgetting would not be so simple. And somewhere across the city, Han Ji-hoon sat in the back of his black car, staring out at the same morning sky. His parents spoke around him, the weight of duty pressing down harder with every passing mile. But in the quiet of his own mind, only one thing echoed: the sound of her voice in the dark, and the way her hand had fit so perfectly in his. The city carried them in opposite directions, but the thread between them had not broken. It only waited. Seoul was always busiest in the afternoons, its streets packed with the rhythm of ordinary life. The sidewalks pulsed with office workers hurrying between meetings, students laughing as they spilled out of cafes, street vendors shouting the day's prices for roasted chestnuts and daeok skewers. Amid the chaos, Lee Na-kyung carried her grocery bag pressed to her side, careful not to let the thin handles tear. She had just finished her part-time shift at a bookstore and was heading home, her thoughts already on what simple meal she could prepare for herself and her younger brother that evening. Life had slipped back into routine, or at least she told herself it had. But every time she boarded a bus, every time she saw the evening sky turn indigo, her thoughts drifted to that night in the air. She told herself it was foolish to dwell on something fleeting. He belonged to another world, one lit with flashing cameras and family dynasties. She belonged here, quiet, unseen. She turned down a narrow side street lined with tiny shops, adjusting her bag. And then she froze. There he was. Han Ji-hoon standing in front of a coffee stand, dressed in a plain sweater and cap pulled low. He looked almost unrecognizable from the man surrounded by guards and reporters at the airport. He was stirring sugar into a paper cup of coffee, his shoulders relaxed, his expression unguarded. But when he lifted his head, his eyes locked on hers instantly. Recognition flared, sharp and undeniable. Na-kyung's heart lurched. For a moment she considered turning, walking quickly away, before he could confirm what he'd seen. But it was too late. He was already moving toward her. "I thought it was you," he said, his voice low but certain. Lee Na-kyung. Hearing her name on his lips again sent a shiver through her. She shifted her bag nervously. "You remembered? How could I forget?" His smile was faint but genuine. "I've been looking for you." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because," he said simply, "you left too quickly, and I didn't get to thank you properly for that night, for being there." The street noise swelled around them, but for Na-kyung, it all faded. She struggled to find words. "It was just a flight." "No," he corrected. "It wasn't just a flight." Before she could respond, an older woman shuffled past with a heavy basket, muttering about blocking the sidewalk. Ji-hoon stepped aside quickly, laughing under his breath, and motioned toward a quieter alley. "Come with me, just for a coffee. No cameras here, I promise." Hesitation battled in her chest. She should say no. She should protect the fragile shield she had rebuilt since the airport. But her feet betrayed her, following him to a tucked-away cafe where students hunched over laptops and the smell of roasted beans filled the air. They sat at a small corner table. He took off his cap, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time she saw him without the weight of expectation pressing visibly on his shoulders. "You really work at that bookstore down the street?" he asked, after she mentioned it in passing. She nodded. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest." He smiled faintly. "I envy that." She frowned. "You envy selling books?" "I envy having a life that's yours, one you can choose." He leaned back, studying her. "Mine is chosen for me every morning before I even wake up." There was no bitterness in his tone, only quiet truth. And for the first time, she saw not just the air, but the man. The boy who had once dreamed of music. The man trapped in a cage built of duty. Their conversation slipped easily into lighter things after that. He teased her about her serious expressions, and she teased him about his poor disguise, pointing out that even in plain clothes, he couldn't hide the way people glanced at him. At one point, when he tried to pour cream into his coffee, the lid popped off and splashed onto the table. Na-kyung laughed, unable to stop herself. So the heir to billions can't even handle a coffee lid? He grinned, wiping the mess with a napkin. Careful. If word gets out, my reputation will be ruined. She arched a brow. Reputation. Do you practice being mysterious? Or does it just come naturally? His laugh came easily this time. I thought you liked quiet people. Isn't mystery part of the package? She almost rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her with another smile. For a few minutes they were just two ordinary people in a cafe, laughing at coffee stains and teasing each other about nothing. But outside, reality pressed closer. When they left the cafe, a man with a camera lingered at the corner. Na-kyung stiffened, her instincts sharp. Ji-hoon noticed too. He cursed under his breath, stepping subtly between her and the lens. Don't look. Just keep walking. Her pulse raced. Is he following you? They all are, he muttered. Always. The weight of his world crashed back around them. Na-kyung understood in that moment how fragile this was, how dangerous. One picture, one headline, and her quiet life would shatter. They crossed the street, but it only grew more complicated. A group of office workers passing by recognized him, whispering loudly, pointing in his direction. Ji-hoon kept his head down, guiding Na-kyung quickly into another alley, away from the crowd. She pulled her arm back slightly. This is insane. How do you live like this? He stopped, his chest rising and falling with frustration. I don't. I endure it. And lately, I've been asking myself if enduring is the same as living. Her heart clenched at the weariness in his tone. She had her struggles, yes, but at least her anonymity was hers to keep. His every step was someone else's spectacle. They slowed their pace, the danger of discovery easing for the moment. But the question lingered. Doesn't it bother you, she asked softly, that no matter where you go, someone is watching? All the time, he admitted. Then, after a beat, his smile turned playful. But right now, I don't care. Right now, I'm with you. And that feels different. Her cheeks warmed at his honesty. What do you think? Could you live in someone else's shadow if it meant being near them? Or would you walk away to protect your peace? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe, so you don't miss the next part of this story, the part where choices become harder and hearts get tested. They stood at a crosswalk as the light turned red, the city buzzing around them. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and for a moment, neither the cameras nor the family expectations mattered. But the question lingered. How long could fate hold them together before reality tore them apart? The days that followed blurred into something unreal, like a fragile dream stretched too thin. Han Ji-hoon found excuses to see her. Quiet moments stolen between obligations, meetings, and the endless scrutiny of his family. Sometimes it was a cup of coffee after her bookstore shift, sometimes just a short walk by the river when his schedule allowed. Each time Lee Na-kyung told herself it would be the last. Each time she failed to stay away. The city seemed to conspire against them. Seoul was too alive, too crowded, and yet they carved out corners where no one was supposed to look. But secrets in a city like Seoul never stayed hidden for long. One evening, Na-kyung stood in the bookstore stacking new arrivals on a display table. The doorbell chimed, and when she looked up, she froze. A woman stood at the entrance, elegant and poised, dressed in designer clothes that whispered money and power. Her eyes scanned the store before settling on Na-kyung with sharp curiosity. You must be Lee Na-kyung, the woman said, her voice smooth but cold. Na-kyung's fingers tightened around the stack of books. I'm sorry. Do I know you? The woman's smile was practiced, flawless. Not yet, but you should know me. I'm the one Han Ji-hoon is supposed to marry. The words landed like a blow. Before Na-kyung could gather herself, the woman stepped closer. Don't look so surprised. Did you think no one would notice? You've been seen with him. Photographed even. Na-kyung's heart thudded painfully. That's not... Don't bother denying it. The world may not know your name yet, but they will. And when they do, they'll chew you up and spit you out. Do you think you can survive in his world? You can't even imagine what it would do to him, to the company, to everything his family built. Her voice dripped with disdain, but beneath it Na-kyung sensed fear, not of her, but of what Ji-hoon might choose. The woman's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at Na-kyung. Be smart. Walk away. It's the only kindness you can offer him. And then she was gone, heels clicking against the wooden floor, leaving silence in her wake. Na-kyung sank against the counter, her knees weak. The stack of books slipped from her arms, scattering across the floor. Customers glanced over curiously, but she couldn't move. Her chest felt hollow. That night, she didn't answer Ji-hoon's calls. But the next day, the headlines did. Photographs of them walking together near the cafe splashed across news sites. Heir spotted with mystery woman? Is this a scandal before his engagement? The images weren't scandalous. They weren't even romantic. Just two people walking side by side. But the captions spun their own story, and the world devoured it. Reporters swarmed outside his company. Commentators speculated about the identity of the woman. Online forums filled with cruel guesses and harsh judgments. In the middle of it all, Ji-hoon called her again. This time, she answered. "Don't panic," he said, his voice steady but tight with tension. "I'll fix this." "Fix this?" Her voice trembled. "You can't. They've already decided who I am, and they'll use it to destroy you." "They can't destroy me." "They can," she whispered. "And they will. Your family, your fiancé. They won't let this go. You know that." For the first time, his composure cracked. "Do you think I care about them more than I care about you?" The words pierced her, both beautiful and terrifying. Silence stretched between them. Then, softly, she said, "You should." The line went quiet. She closed her eyes, pressing the phone to her chest, wishing the world could be different. The following evening, Ji-hoon confronted his parents. The house was a palace of glass and marble, filled with echoes of voices that never softened. His father's voice thundered through the study. "You will end this nonsense immediately. The engagement dinner is already arranged. Do you understand the damage a scandal can do to our reputation?" Ji-hoon stood tall, his hands clenched at his sides. "It's not nonsense." His mother's eyes flashed with warning. "She is nothing, Ji-hoon. Do you understand? A bookstore clerk. She cannot stand beside you. You have responsibilities." "I have a heart," he snapped, his voice breaking with frustration. The room froze. Even his father seemed momentarily stunned. But then the fury returned. "A heart will not save this company. A heart will not save your future. Sacrifice is the price of privilege, and you will pay it." Ji-hoon stormed out, slamming the door behind him. For once, he didn't care about the consequences. That night, he went to Na-kyung's small apartment. She opened the door cautiously, her eyes wide with worry. "You shouldn't be here." "I don't care," he said, stepping inside. "Let them write their headlines. Let them threaten me. I won't walk away from you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. "You have no idea what they'll do. They'll destroy everything you've worked for. And I can't be the reason for that." "You're not the reason. They are. Their greed, their control." He took her hands, gripping them tightly. "Tell me the truth, Na-kyung. If it were only us, no family, no company, no headlines, would you want this? Would you want me?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Her silence was louder than any answer. And in that silence, both of them knew. The breaking point had come. The storm around them raged louder with every passing day. Headlines multiplied, speculations spiraled, and whispers followed Han Ji-hoon wherever he went. But through it all, one truth had crystallized in his heart. He could no longer pretend. The engagement dinner was arranged in a grand hotel ballroom. Chandeliers glittering overhead, reporters waiting just outside the gilded doors. His parents moved through the crowd with smiles carved from stone, and his fiancée stood at his side, perfect and composed. Cameras flashed as guests whispered about the scandal, about the mysterious woman who had already shaken the family's plans. Ji-hoon lifted his glass when the toast was called, but his hand trembled. The words of duty pressed in, but all he could see was Lee Na-kyung's face in the quiet of that airplane cabin, her laughter slipping past her defenses, her hand in his during the storm. When the applause faded, he set the glass down with finality. "I can't do this," he said, his voice carrying through the room. Conversations halted. His fiancée stiffened, her composure cracking for the first time. His father's glare could have shattered glass. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying no," Ji-hoon replied firmly. "I won't marry for duty. I won't spend my life chained to expectations that don't belong to me. My choice is mine, and I've already made it." Gasps rippled through the room. His mother tried to hush him. His father's voice thundered in protest. But Ji-hoon kept speaking. "For years, you've told me who to be, what to do, who to love. Tonight, I'm telling you no. I will not sacrifice the one person who makes me feel alive just to protect an image." The fiancé's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting like glass. "You'll regret this, Ji-hoon. Walking away from me, from this alliance, will cost you everything." He looked at her steadily. "Then it will cost me everything, but it will give me back myself." Silence fell like a hammer. Then his father's voice roared, "You're no son of mine if you walk out of this room." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "Then tonight, I walk out as my own man." He left the ballroom, ignoring the stunned guests and the exploding flashes of cameras. Outside, the cold night air struck his face, but it felt like freedom. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed her number. When she answered, her voice was wary. "Why are you calling?" "Because," he said, his chest heaving, "I just walked away from everything, and the only place I want to go now is where you are." There was silence, then a whisper. "You're insane." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I'd rather be insane with you than sane without you." Moments later, he was in the back of a taxi, the city rushing by in streaks of neon and shadow. His heart pounded with fear, but also with certainty. For the first time in his life, the choice was his. When Na-kyung opened the door to her apartment, she found him standing there, hair tousled, tie abandoned, eyes burning with determination. He stepped forward without hesitation, taking her hands in his. "I'm done letting them decide my life," he said. "I want you, not because fate put us on that flight, not because the world is watching, but because when I'm with you, I feel like myself, and I can't give that up. Not now, not ever." Tears filled her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. "You don't know what this means, Ji-hoon. They'll fight you. They'll hate me. They'll never forgive." "Let them," he interrupted, his voice fierce but steady. "I don't need their forgiveness. I need you." Her heart broke open at the raw honesty in his words. For years, she had hidden behind silence, believing love was too dangerous, too fragile. But here he was, standing in her doorway, choosing her above everything else. Slowly she nodded, her tears mixing with laughter. Then, "Stay." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time, neither of them held back. Their embrace was fierce, desperate, full of the promise that no amount of duty could erase. The world outside would keep spinning. The cameras would keep searching. The family would keep fighting. But in that moment, none of it mattered. For Lee Na-kyung and Han Ji-hoon, the night on the plane had been the beginning. This was the choice that turned it into forever. Months later, spring arrived in Seoul, painting the city with cherry blossoms and soft breezes. The scandal had not disappeared. Headlines still resurfaced, critics still whispered, and Ji-hoon's family remained estranged. But despite it all, He and Na-kyung had built something real. They walked hand in hand along the river, unnoticed by most, their laughter blending with the chatter of families enjoying the season. He no longer wore the armor of expensive suits. She no longer carried herself as though the world demanded silence. Together, they had carved out a life in between, simple, imperfect, but theirs. One afternoon, they sat at the bookstore where she still worked, sipping coffee at the little corner table they now called theirs. A customer recognized him, whispering nervously to a friend. Ji-hoon only smiled, squeezing Na-kyung's hand. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly when they were alone. Walking away, he shook his head firmly. "Not for a second. I lost the life they wanted for me, but I found the life I wanted with you. That's worth more than all their money combined." Her heart swelled at his certainty. For once, she believed it too. And maybe that's what love really is. Not fate, not coincidence, but the courage to choose each other again and again, no matter the cost. Would you have chosen love or duty? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear what you would do if it were your heart on the line. And if you've come this far in the story, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscription helps us bring more stories of courage, of love, of the what-if moments that remind us it's never too late to choose differently. Because sometimes one flight, one night, one choice can change everything.